Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be looking at exam questions to get ready for your A-level exams, and we're focusing specifically on Tony Harrison. Now this video is for people doing AQA A-level Lit B, so if you're doing any other spec, this video is not relevant to you. Right, let's jump right into an exam question then. So here's an example on the screen, just take a moment to read through it. Okay, so lots of information is packed into this question, and if you're anything like me, you probably read the first line and skimmed the rest of it. But you need to read the whole thing really carefully because actually AQA are giving you loads of hints about how to succeed in your answer. So first of all, we have a pretty strongly worded statement. So Harrison presents work as cruel and degrading. It is one-sided, and that's giving you opportunity to disagree with the statement. The question stem is asking to what extent do you agree with this view? So you can completely agree or you can partially agree with a bit of a counter argument. I would not recommend completely disagreeing just because of the way the exam board set the questions up. It's more straightforward and much less complicated to mainly agree with the question. Then that final line in the question is so important, and AQA always include this. Do not forget to explore the authorial methods and the effects of those methods. Overall, this question gives you 25 marks, so I'd expect you to spend about 50-55 minutes on this. Definitely no more than 60 minutes on this question in the exam. And you should be writing about 4 pages, trying to cover absolute minimum of 3, preferably 4 poems in your answer. So how are we going to plan our response? Well, I do a 3-stage plan, and the first thing I do is to brain dump the information, where I basically write down everything I can think of that might be relevant to the question. Because this is poetry, you can see here that I've written down the titles of the poems that I think are relevant, and then I've just jotted down a couple of notes for each poem. So just pause the video, have a quick read through that, start the video again when you're ready. Right, our next stage then is to refine the plan. So here I look at my brain dump and I think, right, what order am I going to do things in? In the exam, I probably wouldn't write this out again, but I'd probably use numbers to go back and number the things on my brain dump. So I've decided what order I'm going to do it in. There's different considerations to think about here. So you might be thinking about putting your strongest ideas first. You'll know how much you can write in the time in the exam. So think about what's going to pack the biggest punch in terms of your concepts, your analysis, your understanding, your knowledge, and all of that kind of thing. So maybe think about putting them first. Or you might want to think about setting up your main argument and then building your counter argument in, that kind of thing. So here's my refine. So starting with working, thinking about the conditions of the workers, then the role of the poet, then linking that into them and us and the role of the poet, into marked with a D, and if I have time, national trust. And my final stage in this process is to summarise. Now, essentially, this turns into my introduction, which you'll see a little bit later. But whether you do this as a separate sentence or whether you do this as your intro, I think it's a really important step to take, and it's something that you need to keep looking back at as you write your essay. The strongest essays will be really firmly rooted in a clear and concise argument. So what we're going for here is clarity. Do not overload this summary with too many big words, with too many complex ideas, with too many, possibilities. It could be this or it could be this. Leave all of that for your PhD thesis. Here, you're just giving a really clear and direct response to the question. Okay, so pause the video, have a read of what I've written, start the video again when you're ready. Right, so what we can see here is that the summary is pretty similar to my introduction. So what is the examiner looking for then as you write your introduction to your essay? Well, I think 2 things mainly. First thing is a clear argument in response to the question. Clarity is absolutely key. Don't overcomplicate it. And then linking to the writer's message. So in terms of my clear response to the question, I've picked that out in yellow. So Harrison presents the treatment of labourers and workers as degrading and cruel. However, Harrison also balances this with this concept of the work of the poet, and therefore as not being degrading but rather essential. Okay, so kind of 3 steps to my argument there. And then in blue, I've got my key concepts. So he wants to critique social inequality. He wants to dignify, celebrate, memorialise those whom history has forgotten, give a voice to the voiceless. Then I move on to the main body of my essay. So I just want you to pause the video and take your time to read this. Don't just skim it, read it properly, and then start the video again. Okay, so we're not going to break this down in terms of the assessment objectives, but what you can see here is that in this particular style of essay, where I'm looking at several poems, I'm basically theming each paragraph around a poem, and I'm working pretty much chronologically through the poem from start to the finish, and as I'm doing that, I'm picking out the things that are relevant to the question. It's a real temptation in an exam to just splurge everything you know about the text onto the page. But you've got to think about your time, and you've got to think about what's going to get you those marks and help you to answer the question. As I said earlier, if you want to spend years exploring things in a huge amount of depth and looking into every single detail and really kind of getting properly to grips with some literature, then absolutely do it at university, do a master's, do a PhD. But the A-level exam is a very specific type of writing. You need to be focused on what's going to get you the marks here, okay, when you're sitting in that exam room. So I'm working chronologically through the poem. You can see I've made a couple of links across to other texts. So I've linked it to Them and Us and Divisions and National Trust. That shows a real sense of cohesion, your understanding of Harrison's body of work as a whole. So that's a really nice thing to do, especially if you're pushing for band 4 or band 5. The other benefit of that is if you're running out of time in the exam, it means that you've dropped in some references to show that you know the whole oeuvre, the whole set of Harrison's work that you're studying. And then you don't have to stress quite so much about the time, because you need to be relaxed in an exam. A little bit of pressure, a little bit of fear to keep you writing, to keep you motivated. But I want you to enjoy your exams and to relish the opportunity to just sit and be able to write and get to grips for 3 hours with some of the best things that have been written in the English language. Okay, so having a look then at some of the things that you might be able to borrow from this, I've highlighted some key sentence starters for you. So what you'll notice is that I've put Harrison towards the front of every sentence. Now, sometimes what we see in kind of band 2 responses, band 3, is that students lead with the character rather than the writer. And then as you go into band 4 and band 5, students are more leading with the writer rather than the character. And that applies for the novels and the plays as well. So I'm putting Harrison's name towards the front of my sentence, and then I'm using analytical verbs. So he begins by focusing on, he creates, he uses, he emphasizes. Those words are triggering some analysis. Well, what is he emphasizing and why is he emphasizing that? So those particular verbs are really powerful to use. I really like using adverbs like immediately or instantly, because again, that helps you to think analytically about the text. Okay, so feel free to borrow those sentence starters if they are useful for you. Now, lots of students often ask me, right, what's the difference between maybe band 4, which is coherent and thorough, or band 5, which is perceptive, or band 3, which is straightforward, and band 4, which is coherent and thorough. So a lot of this comes back to the argument, and we're going to look a little bit at AO1 here just before we move on to the conclusion. So a pretty straightforward argument, so a kind of band 3 argument for this, would be that Tony Harrison uses the historical figure Patience Kershaw to present the work as degrading. Okay, absolutely fine. Put your evidence and your analysis in there. That would be called a straightforward argument. Now, the mistake I think that lots of students make is when they're trying to move up the mark scheme, they overcomplicate things. They think they've got to pack everything in and get every single thought in there. And so often what you end up seeing is sentences that are maybe 6-7 lines long, packed maybe 5 in really deep, powerful ideas into one sentence, and then not back that up as much with the analysis and the consideration of the text. And sometimes I like to think about an essay as being like a scientific experiment. So in science, you would have your hypothesis, and then you do your experiment, you get your results, you analyze your results in order to prove that hypothesis. So in English, when you're making a statement, when you're making an argument, you've almost got to see that as a hypothesis, which you're then going to test. So if you're looking for a more perceptive and more sophisticated argument, we're not necessarily looking for anything that seems overly complex or it's overloaded with really kind of complicated words and that kind of thing. But what we're looking for is something that's really clearly thought through and that's clearly evidenced and that you've tested that particular hypothesis. So example 2 on the screen, Tony Harrison uses a historical figure of Patience-Kershaw to present work as degrading, evidence analysis, etc. Right, exactly the same as what I've got in example 1. If I'm pushing into band 5, I might kind of layer a little bit more onto this. I might add some more complex vocabulary, but I'm not going to massively deviate from that sentence. But then I'm going to look at alternatives. I'm going to explore other ideas. So once I have tested that hypothesis about Patience-Kershaw and work as degrading, I'm going to say, however, elsewhere in his poetry, he also celebrates work that leads to a valued product as he does in Fee, and then my evidence and my analysis. So my perceptive, assured, sophisticated argument is broken down into steps, and I'm gradually building up my evidence base to prove each step before I move on to the next one. Okay, so thinking about the conclusion, then this is what we end up with. Clear response to the argument and a link to the writer's message. And so ultimately, Harrison critiques employers' abuses of power through history, revealing how they have systematically degraded and treated their workers cruelly. Okay, so there's my straightforward argument. Some nice language, some nice vocabulary to express it in, but not overly complicated. And I'm also using the wording from the question, so degraded and cruel were in the question, so I'm getting that in there. I've got some other buzzwords in here like abuses of power and systematically and so on. And then my more complex, sophisticated argument is coming through here. So yet Harrison also posits an alternative world of work. And then I'm linking this to the writer's message. So one in which value is attached to the product and in which individuals have dignity and identity and a voice. Okay, there's lots of other videos on my website where I break this down step by step. So if any of those steps aren't clear to you or you want a little bit more practice, have a look on the A-level page on my website and you can find some more guidance there. Thank you very much, everyone.